I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, Day in Court. A Catholic pro-lifer and father of 7 begins his trial amid federal charges. We have a report and reaction. Debt limit debate. Why lawmakers are concerned over U.S. government spending and how it could hurt the economy. The church in Germany. New developments in the relationship between the Vatican and the German Synodal Path. And fighting back. A closer look at an effort in Virginia to protect gender-questioning children and their parents. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on this Feast of St. Francis de Sales. Our top story tonight, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland weighs in on the Biden administration's push to make abortion the law of the land. He slams states that have enacted pro-life laws designed to save the unborn. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, speaking at a roundtable meeting at the Justice Department on protecting abortion access, Attorney General Merrick Garland not only went after certain state legislatures, but also promised to keep fighting for what he calls reproductive freedom.
U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland goes after state lawmakers passing pro-life laws.
Legislatures across the country took steps to impose bans and other restrictions on access to abortion, with devastating consequences for women's health, their safety, and their civil rights.
And he emphasized the fight continues.
On the day Roe was overturned, I said the Justice Department would use every tool at its disposal to protect the rights of Americans to their reproductive freedom.
But Denise Harley with Alliance Defending Freedom told us the Biden administration is trying to push an extremist pro-abortion regime on our nation, putting us in line with China and North Korea.
For the administration to try to use heavy-handed moves to override the state laws is a violation of our democratic principles. It's a violation of federalism. And it's just a violation of human rights.
The White House also responding to mass shootings. California mourning its third attack in 8 days, including 7 people killed in Half Moon Bay, south of San Francisco.
President Biden, like most Americans, believes that this is an urgent issue, that too many of our neighbors, colleagues, kids are losing their lives to gun violence.
President Joe Biden applauds senators who reintroduced a federal assault weapons ban and legislation that would raise the minimum purchase age for assault weapons to 21, adding, "We know the scourge of gun violence across America requires stronger action."
And while President Biden faces pressure and questions for mishandling classified documents, we're learning tonight, even though it's illegal to store classified documents in an unauthorized location, you can only be convicted if you knowingly took the documents from where they belong. So intent is important. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Another political figure is accused of mishandling classified documents. This time, it is former Vice President Mike Pence. According to his lawyer, a small batch of classified documents were discovered at his home in Indiana. Pence says that he was unaware of the documents and will cooperate with any investigation. Well, the trial starts today in Philadelphia for the pro-life father of 7 who was arrested by the FBI in an early morning raid last September. Several dozen supporters were outside the courtroom today. Mark Houck is charged with violating federal law for repeatedly assaulting a Planned Parenthood volunteer in 2021, a charge he strongly denies. Jury selection took part this morning. The case could be wrapped up by the end of the week. If convicted, Houck faces 11 years in prison. Joining us tonight is attorney Matt Heffron with more on what to expect in the courtroom this week. Matt, great to be with you. I know that you feel that you have a pretty good case on your hands here. How do you see this all playing out, and what does a best case scenario look like?
Well, best case scenario would be obviously an acquittal either by the judge on the law or by a jury if it goes all the way to the jury. Tracy, we're thinking it'll probably be about a 2-day case. Could be 1 day, but that would be highly unusual. And quite honestly, it's a very simple case. In fact, almost in some ways kind of silly if it had not been for the Department of Justice bringing this case. That's why it's so short.
Yeah, and for our viewers who maybe are new to this story, if you don't mind, can you briefly, tell us about that FBI raid on Mark Houck's home and how it really threw this case into the national spotlight?
Sure. It actually started well before that national raid, in that the federal prosecutor had sent Mark Houck what's known as a target letter. And that usually means that the grand jury is considering a case. And I was contacted, and I did what I always do in a white collar case like this. I contacted the prosecutor. I left 2 phone messages over time saying that it didn't look like they had any case here, but that if she were going to want to indict this individual, we would bring him in peacefully so that he and his family wouldn't be bothered. She never responded to me. And I'll tell you, in 20 years of doing that, I used to be a federal prosecutor in charge of one of the criminal divisions of Phoenix office before that. But in 20 years of being a defense attorney, I had never once not had a prosecutor respond to me. The next thing I heard, in fact, it was from this prosecutor, saying that they had stormed Mark's house and had taken him in under arrest instead of walking him in peacefully. They had some 20 FBI agents, maybe, in fact, it was kind of funny later, the FBI quibbled about it. Well, they didn't have 20, they had maybe 15. That's a huge number, especially when they're all with guns drawn and armor on, going to someone who's an absolutely peaceful person, completely peaceful background, and arrested him 7 in the morning in front of his 7 children and wife. It's an awful situation. And for all the years that I was with the Department of Justice, I would never have expected something like this to happen through the Department of Justice.
Yeah, it really is unbelievable.
Well, that's the background. It is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And if you want to hear a little bit about the facts of the case, this is why it's even more unbelievable. The facts happened a year earlier, a year before the arrest, and they were very much just a case of a scuffle on a sidewalk. One of the people who call himself an escort, and actually they're there primarily to harass the pro-life counselors, was harassing Mark Houck. Mark Houck wasn't even close to the door of the clinic. He was down on the corner praying a rosary with his 12-year-old son. And this escort came back repeatedly and had done so in the past, saying vile things to Mark's son. And finally, Mark gave him a shove. That's the whole case. That's the whole case. A shove on the sidewalk. The fellow fell down, scraped his knee, and got up and went inside.
It's so hard to believe.
It's unbelievable that they would make a federal case out of this.
Yeah, it really is.
Go ahead, Tracy.
Yeah. No. I'm so sorry. We're almost out of time, but quickly, I want to ask you, before we wrap things up here, Matt, I mean, how is Mark and his family doing after all this? Obviously pretty traumatic, and especially his children. They were all home at the time of that raid.
They were, yeah, and it traumatized the kids. Mark is a very tough guy, a good Christian guy. And I should tell you as well that one other point, Tracy, here, knowing that you're going to wrap this up. The Thomas More Society has 3 attorneys out there. We have 3 also on the home front. And they have found something that hasn't ever been delivered in one of these FACE cases. And that is the fact that when FACE was first passed back in 1994, the senators discussing it specifically excluded escorts from being protected. That FACE is to narrowly protect only those who are actually attempting to obtain or provide medical or counseling services. It does not protect escorts. That's what Michael found. That's what we dropped on the judge in the objections to jury instructions last week. We think that should be deciding in this case, and it'll be great if that does come about.
Yeah, and we're going to be following this case very closely. Matt, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us. Please keep us posted.
All right. Thanks, Tracy.
Florida's Supreme Court is set to hear a case on a pro-life law signed by Governor Ron DeSantis. The measure bans abortion after 15 weeks. Planned Parenthood and the ACLU argue that abortion is protected by the state constitution. No date has been set for the hearing. And in Oregon, officials have launched a hotline offering free legal advice on abortion to help people understand the state's abortion laws and issues related to abortion access. It will be staffed by local lawyers and is modeled after similar hotlines in Delaware and in New York. On Capitol Hill, the fight to raise the debt ceiling is heating up. House Republicans have drawn a line in the sand, saying spending cuts must take place and the budget process needs reform. But Democrats and the White House say no deal, claiming raising the debt ceiling shouldn't be a partisan issue. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has the latest.
The clock is ticking. The nation has reached its borrowing limit of $31.4 trillion, and Congress must act or the country could default. But the standoff continues up here on Capitol Hill. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer accuses Republicans of risking the health of the economy and calls their approach dangerous.
House Republicans have kicked off their new majority by saying yes to brinksmanship, yes to hostage-taking, and yes, even to risking default. All because of draconian spending cuts pushed by the hard right.
Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin agrees raising the debt limit is not negotiable.
No, absolutely not. Let's get to the bottom line here. Those who are posing for holy pictures as budget balancers, the MAGA Republicans, if we delay this, if we have short-term extensions of the national debt, we run the very risk of a recession in this economy.
But some Republicans say House Speaker Kevin McCarthy should use the debt limit as a bargaining chip in cutting future government spending.
He made it very clear. I'm ready to sit down with President Biden today to talk about a reasonable debt ceiling, which would mean meaningful spending cuts.
Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat, agrees, saying it's a mistake for the White House not to get involved.
I think it's a mistake because we have to negotiate. This is a democracy that we have. We have a two-party system, if you will, and we should be able to talk and find out where our differences are. And if they're irreconcilable, then you have to move on from there and let the people make their decisions.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell agrees and adds Americans voted for cooperation.
The American people elected a bipartisan, divided government. The country voted to change Washington. So this chamber's Democratic leadership needs to change accordingly.
Congress will need to act by mid-June. If the debt ceiling is not raised, financial markets could fail and the nation's credit rating could be downgraded. Plus, Americans will likely pay more for everything, with interest rates continuing to rise. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including Spirit of Forgiveness. A church leader in Syria opens up about his time in captivity and how one organization is helping to protect parents of gender-questioning children. Thanks for staying with us. The grandparents who are guardians of a Virginia teenager say they were intentionally kept in the dark about their granddaughter's gender struggles. What happened next was a months-long nightmare. Michelle Blair says her 14-year-old granddaughter Sage was bullied, assaulted, and ultimately fell into the hands of a sex trafficker. What's more, after her rescue, Baltimore courts refused to return the girl to her grandparents, accusing them of child abuse for not affirming her chosen gender. And joining us tonight with more is Victoria Cobb, president of the Family Foundation of Virginia. Victoria, great to be with you today. This story is so unbelievable and really so heartbreaking. I understand that Sage told school officials and friends that she was transitioning, and it was at that point that the bullying and the sexual assault began. Why were her grandparents kept in the dark about all this and never told?
We would argue that for a period of time, that was almost the policy of the Commonwealth under our previous governor, that schools were really instructed almost to deceive parents.
And as we mentioned, Virginia, Sage ultimately fell into the hands of sex traffickers who she says found her on a website for transitioners. And after her rescue, the Baltimore courts, they refused to return her to her grandparents. I want to play a clip right now from what Sage's grandmother said, where she talks about the moment in court that she experienced.
We enter the courtroom. Sage comes up on a huge Zoom screen. She looks tiny and broken, and I cry out, "I love you, Sage." Sage says, "I love you too, Nana." The public defender, ytsync-en, quickly takes over and points the finger at us for calling her Sage. She's a he, and his name is Draco, not Sage.
Victoria, that is so hard to hear. What's your reaction to all this?
Well, I think any parent can relate to the tragedy that is the idea that you can't get to your child. I mean, the idea that a judge would separate you. And remember, these parents had only found out that she was transitioning to a boy hours before she ran away. They hadn't even had time to adjust to this child's gender identity as she was working through it. And yet they were accused of abuse and separated from them. It's a tragic story.
It really is. How long did Sage stay in the custody of the courts? And at what point was she ultimately returned to her grandparents?
Well, this was an ordeal that unfolded over months and months, and a really, truly unbelievable story. And it really wasn't until her grandmother, who is her adopted mother, reached out to our law center, Founding Freedoms Law Center, and our attorney actually had to step in and force the court to release Sage back to her parents. They could not hold her. There were no valid allegations separating Sage from her parents.
This is so hard to imagine. And I know that you're pushing for changes in Virginia law because of this. What can you tell us about the so-called Sage's Law, and is it getting any traction?
Yeah, this is a simple thing that says by law, we're going to require that school teachers, administrators, that they inform parents if a child is going to identify or use an alternate bathroom or anything like that within the school premise. It also says counselors have to make parents aware and can't convince kids to hide information from their parents. And then the final piece of Sage's Law is simply to say it is never a case of child abuse if a parent is considered not affirming enough of their child's identity. That alone does not make it abuse. And that's what they dealt with in this situation. So is it getting traction? We are just kind of awaiting its first hearings. It was just introduced, but we think it's getting traction across Virginia. In fact, we polled this just within the last week, and a majority of Virginians say, yes, a parent has a right to know.
Victoria, what about Sage? How is she doing right now?
Well, this is the thing. You know, you can work on laws to prevent future situations, but you can't go backwards. And this child has been irreparable. I mean, the damage that is done is ongoing. Her mom described it as a lifelong sentence to PTSD. I mean, she has gone through trauma. And so rightfully, obviously, we don't have her out here telling her story. And it's really our job to be her advocate and the advocate for future kids who could find themselves in terrible situations because the parent, who is their best defender, their best advocate, is being left out of the ability to help them.
Victoria, I have a question for you. Is there any recourse for her family? I mean, are they seeking maybe to sue the court system in Baltimore over this?
I think they are looking at all their legal options. And, you know, there are times where we need to go after folks through the court system. Sometimes we need to introduce legislation. Sometimes it's a combination of both. None of it will directly fix the harm that's been done to Sage. And that's the truly tragic part, is you can't unwind the ramifications of when adults step in and blind allegiance to this idea of a transgender agenda kind of costs them the ability to see that a parent could be the best help for a child.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to continue to pray for Sage and her family. I know she has a long way to go in the healing process, but we're going to pray for her. Thank you so much, Victoria, for speaking with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, deadly blaze of fire strikes a nearly 200-year-old Catholic church in Turkey. We have an update, plus new developments in the relationship between the Vatican and the German church's Synodal way. Two people are dead and others hospitalized following a fire at a Catholic church in Istanbul. The fire broke out Monday night in the lodgings area of the church. The cause of the blaze is unknown. The church and an adjoining hostel date back from the year 1834. It was the first church for Catholic Armenians in Istanbul. The fire is under investigation. 3 high-ranking officials in Ukraine are stepping down. The deputy head of the president's office, a deputy defense minister, and a deputy prosecutor have all resigned. The resignations come after President Volodymyr Zelensky vowed a staff shakeup over corruption allegations during the war with Russia. The president of the German Bishops' Conference is dismissing Vatican concerns over the country's synodal path. The Holy See says it has concerns over a proposal for a new controlling body for the German church. German Bishop Georg Batzing calls those concerns unfounded, but added that the bishops' conference would address the Holy See's concerns, quote, in the near future. Joining us now from Rome is Rudolf Gehrig, EWTN Vatican Bureau journalist and producer. Rudolf, great to see you as always. Tell us more about the letter from the Vatican.
Good evening, Tracy. The Synodal Way in Germany has been under scrutiny for some time. Not only observers worldwide, but also Catholics directly in Germany have repeatedly expressed their fear that the path this Synodal Way has taken since 2019 could lead to a schism in the Church. The Vatican itself had last expressed the same fears in the fall when the German bishops came to Rome for their Ad Limina visit. The occasion for the latest letter is the decision of the Synodal Assembly in Germany to establish a so-called permanent Synodal Council as a joint advisory and controlling body. The Vatican sees in this the danger that such a construct will undermine the authority of the bishops and the work of the rightful German Episcopal Conference. And it also actually contradicts church law.
And what were some of the specific concerns?
In the summer of 2019, a few months before the Synodal Way in Germany even began, the Pope had already set out in his famous letter to the pilgrim people of God in Germany to express what he envisaged by synodality. Since then, the Pope has had to intervene again and again, correcting and admonishing. In yesterday's letter, therefore, there's a decisive sentence. I quote, "The Holy Father has approved this letter in forma specifica and has ordered its transmission." That means that the Pope takes it into his own hands. It is not the letter of any curial officials, but the mandate and approval comes from Pope Francis himself.
And Rudolf, before I let you go, yesterday the Vatican's letter to the German Bishops' Conference was published, and there was a press conference in Rome on the Worldwide Synod on Synodality. I understand you were there. What can you share with us about that?
The press conference was mainly about the ecumenical prayer vigil to be held in St. Peter's Square in September in the run-up to the Synod's first meeting of bishops. In the press conference, I had the chance to ask a question of the Synod's general relator, Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich. He told me there is no plan. There is a listening to the Holy Spirit as the Holy Spirit expresses himself in the life of people in his church. So the bottom line is that we know, along with the Vatican's letter to the German bishops, what synodality is not. However, where the Synod on Synodality will lead, time will show us, and according to Cardinal Hollerich, hopefully the Holy Spirit.
All right, Rudolf, thank you so much. Rudolf Gehrig, EWTN Vatican Bureau journalist and producer. Thank you again. Finally tonight, an archbishop-elect in Syria gave a recent interview detailing how he survived being held captive by the Islamic State and all the importance of forgiveness. Father Jacques Mourad was kidnapped along with another man in March of 2015. He says while in captivity, the two Christians were asked every day to convert to Islam. Father Mourad and the other man refused, saying they belong to the crucified and risen Christ. The two spent 5 months in captivity. The bishop-elect says that he has forgiven his kidnappers and he prays for them every day. We thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.